Most people think discipline is about willpower. They believe it's about forcing yourself to wake up at 5 a.m., grinding through pain, and pushing harder when you want to quit. But Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, discovered something that will completely change how you see discipline forever. What if I told you that your lack of discipline isn't a character flaw? What if the part of you that procrastinates, that sabotages your goals, that breaks promises to yourself, what if that part is actually trying to protect you? Jung knew that behind every undisciplined behavior lies a fractured psyche, a soul at war with itself. You see, Jung didn't just study the mind. He mapped the territories of human consciousness that most people never dare to explore. And what he found there will disturb you, challenge you, and ultimately liberate you from the prison of your own resistance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't lack discipline because you're lazy. You lack discipline because you're divided. There's a part of you making goals and another part breaking them. One side wants to build, the other wants to disappear. And every day you repeat this cycle, you're not just wasting time. You're deepening a psychological split that Jung warned could destroy your very soul. But here's what's fascinating. Jung discovered that this internal conflict follows predictable patterns. There are 7 psychological laws that govern how discipline actually works in the human psyche. These aren't motivational tricks or productivity hacks. These are fundamental principles of how consciousness operates, and once you understand them, you'll never struggle with discipline the same way again. The first law is the most shocking. What you resist persists. Jung observed that the parts of yourself you try to suppress don't disappear. They go underground and sabotage you from the shadows. That voice in your head that says, "Just 5 more minutes," or "I'll start tomorrow." That's not laziness speaking. That's your shadow. The rejected parts of your personality that you've been at war with for years. Most people try to discipline themselves like dictators, using force and punishment. But Jung knew that true discipline comes from integration, not domination. It comes from making peace with the chaos inside you, not trying to control it. When you understand this first law, everything changes. You stop fighting yourself and start listening to what your resistance is trying to tell you. The second law reveals why most people fail. Discipline without meaning is torture. Jung spent decades studying why some people could endure incredible hardship, while others collapsed under minor stress. What he discovered was that humans can endure almost any pain if they know why they're living. But without that meaning, even the most intense pleasures become mundane. This is why your discipline fails when it's based on external expectations. Because your psyche rejects the fraud of who you're pretending to be. Your subconscious mind has an immune system that protects you from spiritual decay, from becoming someone who has everything except themselves. But when your discipline aligns with your deepest truth, when it becomes an act of devotion to who you really are, something magical happens. The resistance disappears. The internal war ends. And what once felt like punishment becomes a sacred practice of remembering yourself. Are you ready to discover the remaining 5 laws that will transform your relationship with discipline forever? Because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about willpower, motivation, and human potential. Jung's insights go deeper than any self-help book, deeper than any productivity system, because they address the fundamental architecture of consciousness itself. The question is, are you brave enough to look into the mirror of your own psyche and see what's really there? The third law Jung discovered will shatter your illusions about who you think you are. Your discipline problems aren't personal failures. They're symptoms of wearing a mask that doesn't fit your soul. Jung called this mask the persona, the character you play to survive in society. It's the version of yourself that goes to work, pays bills, and pretends to have everything figured out. But here's the terrifying truth. Most people become so identified with their persona that they forget who they really are underneath. Your discipline fails because you're trying to discipline the wrong person. You're trying to force your authentic self to live according to the rules of your social mask. It's like trying to run a marathon in a business suit. Technically possible, but you're fighting against yourself every step of the way. Think about it. How many of your goals actually belong to you? How many are just sophisticated forms of people-pleasing, attempts to earn love, approval, or status? Jung observed that when we pursue goals that don't align with our true nature, our psyche rebels. The procrastination, the self-sabotage, the mysterious loss of motivation. These aren't character defects. They're your soul's way of protecting you from spiritual suicide. The fourth law reveals the hidden engine of all lasting change. Discipline is not about doing, it's about becoming. Most people approach discipline like a transaction. If I do X, I'll get Y. But Jung understood that sustainable change happens at the level of identity, not behavior. When you try to change what you do without changing who you are, you create internal friction. Your old identity fights back, pulls you toward familiar patterns, because consistency is more important to your psyche than improvement. This is why people can lose weight and gain it back, why they can quit smoking and start again, why they can be motivated for weeks and then mysteriously lose all momentum. But when you understand that discipline is about identity transformation, everything shifts. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming?" You stop trying to force new behaviors onto an old self and start cultivating a new self that naturally expresses those behaviors. The fifth law exposes the deepest secret of human motivation. What you call laziness is often wisdom in disguise. Jung noticed that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own seasons. Sometimes what looks like resistance is actually your unconscious mind protecting you from moving too fast, taking on too much, or pursuing the wrong direction entirely. Your procrastination might be telling you that you're not ready yet, that you need more preparation, more clarity, or more rest. Your lack of motivation might be signaling that you're pursuing someone else's dream instead of your own. Your self-sabotage might be your psyche's way of saying, "This path leads away from who you really are." This doesn't mean you should indulge every impulse or excuse every failure. It means you should listen to your resistance with curiosity instead of judgment. What is it trying to tell you? What need is it trying to meet? What truth is it trying to protect? The sixth law reveals why most discipline advice fails spectacularly. You cannot transcend what you refuse to accept. Jung spent his entire career studying the human tendency to split ourselves into good and bad parts, to identify with our virtues while rejecting our vices. But he discovered that this splitting is the root of all psychological suffering. When you try to discipline yourself by rejecting your undisciplined parts, you create an internal war that can never be won. The rejected parts don't disappear. They go underground and sabotage you from the shadows. They make you tired when you need energy, distracted when you need focus, and resistant when you need momentum. True discipline comes from integration, not elimination. It comes from accepting all parts of yourself, the motivated and the lazy, the focused and the scattered, the disciplined and the chaotic, and finding a way for them to work together instead of against each other. This is perhaps Jung's greatest insight. The goal isn't to become perfect. The goal is to become whole, and wholeness includes everything. Your light and your darkness, your strengths and your weaknesses, your discipline and your wildness. Are you beginning to see how radically different this approach is from everything you've been taught about discipline? We're not talking about willpower or motivation or grinding through resistance. We're talking about a fundamental transformation in how you relate to yourself and your goals. The seventh and final law will tie everything together and give you a practical framework for implementing Jung's insights in your daily life. But first, you need to understand something crucial about the nature of psychological change itself. The seventh and final law is Jung's masterpiece, the culmination of everything he learned about human transformation. Discipline is not a skill you develop. It's a relationship you cultivate with the totality of who you are. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are beneath all the masks, expectations, and conditioning. And here's what he discovered. When you align your daily practices with this deeper process of becoming, discipline stops being a struggle and becomes a sacred act of self-creation. But here's where most people get lost. They think individuation means following their impulses, doing whatever feels good, or rejecting all structure and responsibility. That's not individuation, that's inflation, another form of unconsciousness. True individuation requires the highest form of discipline, the discipline to face yourself completely, to integrate your shadows, and to live from your authentic center even when it's uncomfortable. This is why Jung's approach to discipline is so revolutionary. It's not about forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about discovering what you love so deeply that you'll do whatever it takes to serve it. It's about finding the thread of meaning that runs through your life and following it with religious devotion. When you understand this, everything changes. Your morning routine stops being a list of tasks and becomes a ritual of remembering who you are. Your work stops being something you have to do and becomes something you get to do. Your goals stop being external achievements and become expressions of your deepest nature. But Jung warned us about something crucial. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. The psyche changes slowly, like a tree growing or a mountain forming. And during this process, you'll face what he called the dark night of the soul. Periods where everything feels meaningless, where your old motivations die but new ones haven't been born yet. This is where most people give up. They interpret these dark periods as evidence that they're failing, that they're not disciplined enough, that they should go back to their old ways of forcing and grinding. But Jung knew that these dark nights are actually signs of progress. They're the psyche's way of clearing out old patterns to make room for new growth. The key is learning to trust the process, to have faith in your own transformation, even when you can't see the results yet. This requires a different kind of discipline. Not the discipline of doing, but the discipline of being. The discipline to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate not knowing, to keep showing up even when you don't feel like it. Here's how to apply Jung's 7 laws practically. First, start each day by asking yourself, what is my resistance trying to tell me? Instead of fighting your procrastination or lack of motivation, get curious about it. What need is it trying to meet? What truth is it trying to protect? Second, regularly examine your goals and ask, whose dream am I living? Are you pursuing what you think you should want, or what you actually want? Are you trying to become someone else's version of successful, or your own? Third, practice what Jung called active imagination. Dialogue with the different parts of yourself. Talk to your motivated self and your lazy self. Ask them what they need, what they fear, what they're trying to accomplish. You'll be amazed at what you discover. Fourth, create rituals that honor both your discipline and your wildness. Schedule time for structure and time for spontaneity. Honor your need for growth and your need for rest. Remember, the goal is integration, not elimination. Fifth, pay attention to your energy cycles and work with them instead of against them. Jung observed that the psyche has natural rhythms, seasons of expansion and contraction. Fighting these rhythms creates unnecessary suffering. The ultimate secret Jung discovered is this: when you stop trying to discipline yourself and start trying to understand yourself, discipline becomes effortless. Not because life becomes easy, but because you're finally working with your nature instead of against it. You're no longer forcing a square peg into a round hole. You're no longer at war with yourself. You're finally home in your own skin, and from that place of authenticity, extraordinary things become possible. Are you ready for the final part, where we'll explore how to implement these insights and create a life of unbreakable discipline that actually serves your soul. Now comes the moment of truth. You've learned Jung's 7 psychological laws, but knowledge without application is just sophisticated procrastination. The question is, how do you actually live these principles? How do you transform from someone who struggles with discipline into someone who embodies it naturally? Jung believed that real change happens through what he called opus contra naturam, work against nature. But here's the paradox. This work against your conditioned nature is actually work toward your authentic nature. You're not fighting who you are. You're fighting who you've been programmed to be. The first step is creating what Jung called a temenos, a sacred space for transformation. This isn't just a physical space, though that helps. It's a psychological container where you can safely explore the depths of your psyche without judgment or interference from the outside world. Your temenos might be your morning routine, your evening reflection, your weekly planning session, or your daily journaling practice. The key is consistency and reverence. This is where you meet yourself honestly, where you dialogue with your resistance, where you listen to the wisdom of your symptoms. In this sacred space, practice the discipline of radical honesty. Ask yourself the questions most people are too afraid to ask. What am I really afraid of? What am I avoiding? What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? What would I do if I knew I would fail? These questions will reveal the unconscious patterns that have been running your life. Jung discovered that the psyche speaks in symbols, dreams, and synchronicities. Start paying attention to these messages. When you procrastinate, what are you doing instead? When you lose motivation, what thoughts are running through your mind? When you self-sabotage, what emotions are you feeling? These aren't random events. They're communications from your unconscious. The second step is what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of choosing between discipline and freedom, structure and spontaneity, work and play, learn to hold both. Create a life that honors your need for growth and your need for rest, your desire for achievement and your need for meaning. This might mean scheduling both focused work time and creative playtime. It might mean pursuing ambitious goals while also cultivating inner peace. It might mean being disciplined about your practices while remaining flexible about your methods. The third step is developing what Jung called psychological differentiation, the ability to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Many of your discipline problems come from trying to live up to external expectations that have nothing to do with your authentic path. Regular practice. At the end of each day, ask yourself, what did I do today that felt authentic to me? And what did I do today that felt like I was performing for others? This simple practice will gradually help you align your actions with your true nature. The fourth step is embracing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to create something new from the tension between opposites. When you feel torn between discipline and freedom, don't choose one or the other. Ask yourself, how can I create a third way that honors both? This is where true creativity emerges. This is where you stop following other people's formulas and start creating your own way of being disciplined. Maybe your discipline looks like dancing instead of running. Maybe it looks like creating instead of consuming. Maybe it looks like serving others instead of achieving for yourself. The final step is what Jung called the realization of the self. Not the ego self that wants to look good, but the deeper self that wants to be real. When your discipline serves this deeper self, it becomes unbreakable because it's no longer dependent on external circumstances or internal moods. You discipline yourself not because you have to, but because you get to. Not because you're trying to become someone else, but because you're trying to become more fully yourself. Not because you're running from pain, but because you're running toward purpose. This is Jung's ultimate gift to us, the understanding that discipline is not about control. It's about love. Love for who you're becoming. Love for what you're creating. love for the process of transformation itself. When you approach discipline from this place of love rather than fear, everything changes. The resistance dissolves. The internal war ends. And what once felt like punishment becomes the most natural thing in the world. The daily practice of remembering and becoming who you truly are. The 7 laws are now yours. The question is, what will you do with them?